you back, and we're excited to bring in our next guest, Ken Chandler, executive editor of Newsmax magazine, joining us from Newsmax, New York. Ken, it's great to have you with us as we see you unveil this month's cover of Newsmax magazine.
Hi, JD. Hi, Miranda. Good to be with you. And this month, our cover is the Reverend Al Sharpton. And like him or loathe him, Sharpton has now become America's #1 civil rights leader. And the implications for this, for the 2016 election, are potentially enormous.
So what made you decide on Al Sharpton to be the cover of the magazine, to be your cover story?
Well, Miranda, we saw Sharpton's stature rise, if you like, during the summer, during the events in Ferguson, Missouri, where, as you may remember, an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, was shot to death by police. Now, Sharpton went to Ferguson, he says, at the request of Brown's family. But he hadn't been there very long when he got a phone call from the White House. And on the line was Valerie Jarrett, who's one of President Obama's most senior and most trusted advisors. And she was basically asking the Reverend Sharpton, what should we be doing to quell the troubles? Because by then there was rioting, the National Guard had been called in. Sharpton's response was that the Justice Department should get involved immediately. And within 48 hours, guess what? There were about 40 FBI agents on the streets of Ferguson going door to door, canvassing people, looking for examples of civil rights abuses.
Ken, President Obama was supposed to usher in a post-racial era in American politics. With this de facto surrogacy of Al Sharpton, has Mr. Obama, instead of being a post-racial president, has he become the most racial president in our history?
Well, you know, some people think so, and I think it's very interesting that he would turn to someone like Sharpton, who is a very divisive figure. Now, you know, there are polls in the black community that suggest that African Americans are very supportive of Sharpton. But if you poll people in the white community, they totally distrust him. So it is strange that he would turn to someone like Sharpton. But according to the White House, and they gave Newsmax magazine a statement saying that they feel very comfortable dealing with the Reverend Sharpton.
What do you hope readers will get from reading this article?
Well, I think that what you get is an interesting insight into who this man is. You know, he's a very controversial figure. He was involved in several events in the New York area in the 1980s, one of them involving a young lady called Tawana Brawley, who claimed that she was raped by 6 white men. Those charges were subsequently dropped. They were turned out to be totally untrue. Sharpton was very vociferous at the time on behalf of the lady, and he never really apologized for being on the wrong side of that. But it's almost like he's reinvented himself, and you know, he's made himself indispensable because in the 2016 presidential elections, which we're all going to be focusing on the day after tomorrow, it's unlikely that there's going to be a black candidate on the presidential ballot. So the question is, how are the Democrats going to get the African American voters energized? And I think that's where Sharpton is positioned to be a very powerful player.
Ken, earlier today on America's Forum, in fact, we led the program by speaking with Dr. Ben Carson, obviously a conservative, but an African American. Did Al Sharpton have anything to say about Dr. Ben Carson?
Well, they're really on very different wavelengths, I think it's fair to say. You know, there's no question that Sharpton respects Ben Carson. And in fact, Sharpton, you know, has reached across the lines. I mean, he appeared with President George W. Bush when George Bush made a speech in 2009 on education. He's been out campaigning with Newt Gingrich, has Sharpton, for education reform. So Sharpton has proven that he can reach across the aisle, so to speak. I'm not sure whether he would reach across the aisle for Ben Carson.
Ken Chandler, we thank you very much for telling us about the cover of Newsmax magazine. It's great to have you, sir. And we also want to make sure that you get your free offer of the new book from Dick Morris, Power Grab, the #1 bestseller. That will be helpful coming up to take a look ahead to 2016. You can go to newsmax.com/free issue, tying in Newsmax magazine and that great book from Dick Morris. Stay with us. There is more ahead here on America's Forum on this eve of midterm election day. We'll continue here on Newsmax TV.